consider that they are protecting your rights? The information we receive shapes our world, but imagine if those who protect our access to it are removed by people who want to prevent certain information becoming public. What world would that shape? In 2010, two young journalists working as interns for a local Mexican newspaper the cartel. In it, they directly ask them what they should be publishing to avoid further death, injury, and intimidation of its staff. This is how a zone of silence begins, where reporting is no longer independent but controlled by those with power, like drug lords, corrupt officials, businessmen, and politicians. A zone where people cannot access information freely because journalists feel too threatened to report the news. Crimes against journalists are not just limited to a handful of countries. They occur anywhere where the powerful and corrupt want to hide the truth. That means in almost every country, attacks against journalists are committed, including harassment, intimidation, arbitrary imprisonment, kidnappings, violent attacks, and murder. Since 1993, 1,438 journalists have been killed. But the more shocking fact is that for every 10 cases of journalists murdered, only one ends in successful prosecution of the perpetrators. These killings include those dying while reporting armed conflict, but the majority are killed in countries without armed conflict, where journalists are uncovering local stories that some would prefer hidden. In many cases, those involved in these crimes are powerful enough to obstruct investigations and justice, but in other cases, impunity comes from bottlenecks within the justice system itself. In some countries, it's due to justice systems lacking human and financial resources. In others, it's due to corruption and a lack of transparency. While in some cases, it's a lack of knowledge of good practices to investigate these crimes. This often results in the killing of a journalist just being considered a common crime that has no connection to their profession. These shortcomings in justice systems lead to cases taking many years to resolve, if at all. They represent a breakdown in security and the rule of law, which furthers the cycle of violence against journalists. And where does this lead? To the expansion of global zones of silence. Zones where only powerful people decide the news you hear. Zones which violate access innovation. So, how do we solve this? The way forward starts with acknowledging the complexity of these crimes and considering them as crimes against freedom of expression, not just individuals. Central to solving this issue are judicial actors, those responsible for investigating and prosecuting these crimes. Collecting knowledge of how to break the cycle of impunity through
2 years following this decision, 476 organs were transported. Through the actions of investigative journalists and independent media, human lives were saved. This is just one example among many in which evidence-based reporting responded to social problems and triggered positive changes. Think of it, and you'll probably recall many examples where local or international media unearthed money laundering, exposed an abuse of power, or revealed a humanitarian situation. A mechanism of checks and balances needs to be in place and is vital in our society. Journalism fulfills this role by acting as a watchdog. Without it, who would demand responses from public officials and government? Who would scrutinise them? Who would empower the public with information? If journalists were not allowed to operate free of fear or favour, the world would look very different. They are key to our society and keep the powers that be in check. Governments and politicians are not the only ones who need to be held accountable. Every day, journalists pursue investigations exposing the wrongdoings and crimes of private companies and other powerful institutions and individuals. The topics are wide-ranging, from the violent. Imagine a world without media freedom, a world where those in power can get away with corruption, a world where the public is continuously exposed to lies, biased information, and disinformation, a world where no one reports on human rights violations, a world where crime and wrongdoings are never put under the spotlight. We need independent journalists to uphold human rights, realise citizens' right to know, and keep those in power accountable. When this doesn't happen, the loss is enormous. Some time ago, a newspaper journalist investigated a story about a decline in organ transplant in this country. Digging deeper, he discovered that between 2013 and 2015, the National Air Force did not transport 153 organs. Instead, it prioritised 716 flights with government officials during this same period. The article led to a public outcry. This was
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me recognize the presence and arrival of our chief guest, the CS ICT and Digital Economy, Mr. Eli Dowalo, and his delegation from the ministry. I will request you to be upstanding so that we sing our national anthem. And I believe all of you have got nice voices, given that you are coming from the media industry and those especially in the broadcast industry. So we go. Emu Hey, I think you've done so well. Let's just end it there. Because I know next I was going to ask you to sing the East African Community, and I'm sure that is going to be a big challenge to us. Please be seated so that we can start our program. So before we begin the meeting, being advised that singing national anthem is not enough to assume that we have requested the mercy of the Almighty God to bless this meeting, and therefore we will have a word of prayer from none other than the CEO of Kenya Editors Guild, Rosalia Omungo, to lead us in a word of prayer. Then we begin our program formally.
Shall we pray? Father, in the name of Jesus, we are grateful for this morning that you've given unto us. We want to say thank you that you found it fit that we are alive today. We want to say thank you for the guests that have honored our invitation this morning to come and celebrate a day that is important for the life of journalists and for the work that the journalists do. And even as we begin our deliberations this morning, we want to ask that you would come and make our work well. We ask that your presence may be with us in this meeting and that our deliberations will be fruitful. We ask all this through Christ our Lord.
So, CS, ICT and Digital Economy, Eliud Owalo, karibu sana. We are honored to host you, and I'm made to understand that this is the first engagement with the stakeholders outside the ministry. You have been having a busy week since you were sworn in, just trying to understand what is going on in the industry. Karibu sana, and we don't take this for granted. My name is Eric Oduor. I am the Secretary General of Kenya Union of Journalists and convener of Kenya Media Sector Working Group. And to just introduce what is this animal called Kenya Media Sector Working Group, because it was a common name during the elections when we were engaging the stakeholders just to ensure that we have got an environment where journalists were able to access electoral information and pass this information to the public. So Kenya Media Sector Working Group is a coalition of different entities in the media, which was formed on a day like this in 2017 when we were marking the International Day to end impunity and crimes against journalists, so that we can have and harness the synergy that we have when we are working together and not in at cross purposes. So we have about 16 different associations that are in the industry that are working together so that we are able to engage different stakeholders. So if there are Kenya Media Sector Working Group members, please just stand so at least you are able to just say hi, and the organization that you represent, because again, I don't want to be accused of stifling the freedom of expression by denying you the opportunity to be heard by our chief guest. So Kenya Media Sector Working Group members in the house. So I think there is a mic, just to take it round so that I is able to say something, who they are and the organization they represent. We'll start with AMWIC, Association of Media Women in Kenya.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas Brown. I'm here to represent the Association of Media Women in Kenya, where we have over 300 members who are seeing quite a number of journalists, and we work together to enhance and promote the issues to do with freedom of the society, including the poetry, the media. We are grateful to our corporate leader, Impunity, Council of Political Journalists Association of Kenya. We have to be here. We have a membership of over 300 from every county, and our main work was when politics was there. Also, we are proceeding, a member of Kenya Media Sector Working Group. I'm looking forward to hear what the new Minister has for us. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ihora Alam. I work with ATC, but here I represent the Association of Professional Broadcasters. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I am Martin Asai. Sometimes I don't know. Together a so-called enterprise operators that will grow the need to have those publishers, small publishers out there. But I serve good.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Bat, an editor of the Intl, and founder member of the association.
Thank you, Linda.
Good morning. My name is Angela Silima. I work with the Kenya National Commission for UNESCO. I'm a member of Kenya Media Sector Working Group.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I must say before that when the CS was being vetted, I was very keen, and I think there were two takeaway points that even today when we were having a talk show on NTV in the morning, I said when I was asked about what I think about the current regime in terms of press freedom. And the CS said two things. Number one, he said that he's an advocate of self-regulation in the media, which actually touches the heart of all journalists in this country. Because I'm saying that, yes, because we are coming from a regime which was being accused of state capture, and one of the things the regime did was to capture the regulator. He said, number two, that he will engage the stakeholders. Now he's here to engage the stakeholders. I don't think if there's anything else that the media will ask for in addition to the two. If the two are able to work, then I'm very sure that we will have the media that we desire to have. I'll be the session chair for the opening ceremony. And just to tell you that today is the day we are commemorating the International Day to End Impunity and Crimes Against Journalists. And this year event actually is a historic one because it's coming at a time we are reviewing the 10-year UN Plan of Action on Safety of Journalists with the global activity taking place right now in Austria, probably sometime later given the difference in time zones. And UN, given that all of us understand the role of UN, which is to ensure peace and security in the world. And during 2012, in its own sitting at the UN General Assembly, they said that for us to have a peaceful and stable countries, we must focus on governance. And you cannot talk about governance if we do not talk about free and independent media. It's against that backdrop that UN Plan of Action on Safety of Journalists was passed. And today, the world is actually looking at that action plan because it will interest you, CS, that we are required to have reporting mechanism as a country that at UN General Assembly, we are supposed to be presenting a report on the state of the media about some milestones, sometimes also talk about the challenges. Because again, we do not want to be reading the books of lamentation every year, but at times also celebrate some of the gains we've made. I said that because we've just come from a grueling campaign period, and I must say that for the first time after the election, I've not heard or seen any report castigating the media like it did. It happened in 2013 and 2017. Because this time around, media tried as much as we could to ensure that there was no vacuum. Information was flowing to the extent that at some point media was short of calling election. I know there is one media house that called election. That gave us a foundation for future coverage of elections, whereby something that we can celebrate as a country. As much as we are also celebrating and commemorating this day, there are two incidents that have happened that I'm sure will be discussed in Vienna today. The killing of Pakistani journalists is something that is being discussed all over the world. And I must admit that at least for the first time, I've been trending for almost 2 weeks on Twitter because of the statement that we released following the killing of Rashad Sharif some 2 weeks ago. Because the whole world is concerned about this incident. The second incident was the jailing of an editor, again, by a magistrate, and another one was on the verge of being jailed before we intervened. And when the world is celebrating, this is some of the position 102 there to about position 69 in World Press Freedom Ranking. And that was a milestone that we have to celebrate. But some of these incidents, sometimes they interfere with this ranking. So those are some of the things that as we discuss these issues here today, we need to reflect and see how we can consolidate and protect the gains we have made as a country. As I finish, because I'm not supposed to make a speech, I was just supposed to make introduction, there is something that I must talk about because we are talking about crimes against journalists. When we are talking about crimes against journalists, we are not supposed to be looking at external factors that affect operations of the media and freedom of journalists to do their work and also their safety. We must also some of us who are brought up from Christian families and families who believe in Christianity and religion, there is a famous verse that says that if you were to point at someone, a speck in someone's eye, you must also look at the log in your eye. And probably that is what I'm talking about. We must condemn and discuss economic crimes against journalists in this country. We can't focus so much on criminal issues out there, but we do not talk about economic crimes. It's a sad period in this country that we have media houses that have not paid the journalists for 2 months. And yesterday I was having a conversation with some of journalists, actually who are members of KU. In newsrooms actually is now at risk because journalists have not been paid for 2 months. Employer has issued notice for redundancy that has almost expired and nothing is happening and no one is talking to these employees so that they can be prepared. So as we condemn crimes against journalists, we must look at economic crimes against journalists. Journalists who are subjected to slavery, no contracts, no pay, and even the pay is there, is too little if you look at the cost of living in the country right now. If you read another report that painted Kenya in a bad picture, that we are leading in terms of sexual harassment in Israel, in Africa. We are top there. That we can condemn some of these things happening in other countries, in other industries, in other companies, yet sexual harassment is rife in our newsroom and is going on, and we don't talk about it. And yesterday, as I conclude, when we have these conversations with our members in that particular media house, and I asked them, suppose this was happening in some company in industrial area where journalists have not been paid for 2 months. See, itakuwa headline. But now it is happening in our own newsrooms, and nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to admit. As much as media is facing the challenges, but we must protect the rights of journalists as their employers. As I exit the podium, I want to invite Angela to take over and continue with the remaining part of the program as we continue with this conversation and condemn crimes, and especially economic crimes against journalists in our newsroom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Cabinet Secretary, the Ministry of ICT and Digital Economy, the representative of the Director of Public Prosecution, heads of different institutions in the media sector, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We wish to begin the next session, and it's going to be a short session. We hope that we will be here up to around midday when we close. But my duty here is to chair the next session. I will not take much, but to invite you to commemorate this day, which is the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. Before I call upon the next presenter, I think it's only fair that we observe a minute of silence as media sector working group members for the killing of one of our own in our country. So ladies and gentlemen, let us observe a minute of silence. Thank you. CS, we want to acknowledge that this is your first official duty, and we do not take it for granted that it is. We appreciate that. We are also observing 10 years since the UN declared the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists. So this is an important day. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to call our first speaker. I will call Mr. Churchill Otieno. Mr. Churchill Otieno is the president of the Kenya Editors Guild and a co-convener of the Media Sector Working Group. Let us appreciate him.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, SG, for those remarks. Mr. Elido Walu, the CS for Information, Communication, and the Digital Economy. I think in the interest of accuracy, colleagues, we need to recognize that the T in that ministry has since metamorphed into a DE, digital economy. So it's no longer a meeting of journalists. I think accuracy is our first value. The Secretary for Information in the ministry, Judy Munyini, who this morning has promised that she'll finally come in to take her seat as a member of the guild. Being a veteran of our newsrooms, leaders of the membership of the Kenya Media Stakeholders Working Group, my seniors in the room, and allow me to recognize the editor-in-chief at the Standard Group, Mr. Chieng Rapuro, and also recognize my predecessor in this seat, who is also the editorial director at we also have some fairly recognizable members of the guild in the room, and allow me to pick a few, starting with a man who has taught many of the journalists in our newsrooms today, Professor Levi Obonyo. Good to see you. Allow me also to acknowledge the presence of many, many friends of journalism, friends of media, and people who have manifested true adherence to the values that we stand for. And if I'm to only mention one of them instead of all of them, my brother Irungu Horton, good to see you here this morning. Karibu sana. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good morning. It's yet another day when journalists globally, and indeed the entire media fraternity, takes a pause to reflect on the work we do, but from the lens of those who also work so hard to make that work difficult. Looking back, the last 1 year, it's unfortunate that we have journalists who have ended up losing their lives for committing no sin other than doing journalism. And this is a day that we acknowledge them, not just in remembrance, but we acknowledge them in demanding that justice be served in making sure that those who committed those offenses are brought to book. One of our key guests this morning is the Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Nurdin Haji. I still hope he'll be able to join us. In many ways, he's the #1 duty bearer when it comes to this day. We are happy that he's been able to collaborate with the Kenyan Media Stakeholders Working Group before, and we want to believe that that remains true as we move forward. 4 key things I'd like to highlight as I prepare the ground for the CS to come and address of impunity in Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, Bwana Waziri, as the world marks this day with an international event happening in Vienna, the one thing that every single gathering in the globe today will pay homage to is the shooting of Ashad Sarif on our doorstep. Ashad Sarif is renowned not for anything but for journalism in his home country, Pakistan. Many of us did not know that he was in our country until this heinous act happened. As it were, the Kenya police came out to own up that it's their bullet that fell this comrade. The Kenya Editors Guild, as indeed many other media voices, came out to demand that quick, comprehensive investigations be done on this incident so that we get to know what exactly happened that ended up in Ashad Sarif's death. It's been many days, turning into weeks now. I think a time has come that the Kenyan public and indeed the international fraternity are owed by our authorities a word on what are the findings of these investigations. It is a key point because if we cannot keep a journalist as prominent as Ashad safe in our country, can we keep ourselves safe? That's a question that we must ask ourselves. And we must ask that because we are just coming out of an election period. And if you look at our records, there are dozens of journalists who came under attack, who came under threats by politicians and by goons hired by politicians for no sin other than for doing their job. We owe these fellow citizens a duty to make sure that their cases are not pushed under the carpet. I'm sure as the day goes by, we'll get to the details because the stakeholders want to do as a record of every incident that happened. But we must also ask ourselves, in the year 2022, in the year when the media business has become so sophisticated, at a time when the world is so connected, is it enough to define impunity so narrowly? I'd like to invite us that maybe this is the time to also consider impunity delivered through soft channels. And the biggest of them is the soft economic channel. And in that, ask ourselves, who are the perpetrators of economic crimes against individual journalists, and who are the perpetrators of economic crimes against the media sector as an industry? Our young people, our professionals, our entities toil day and night to create value in the media. But we find that this value is not always invested in the growth of the media and in the development of this same media. Questions must be asked, and maybe we need to invite the bright minds around the room to help us then see how do we structure media policy, how do we structure a legal framework to make sure that value created in the media business, a good chunk of it, is reinvested to ensure that the media business grows. Not just as a business, but I believe that a true reading of our Constitution embeds a suggestion that where our media fails, our society begins to falter. Because as a democracy, we depend on timely delivery of verifiable and reliable information for our citizenry to participate in their lives as Kenyans and in the development of our country. And that leads me to the second issue I'd like to raise, the whole question of media independence. Because the media cannot serve and deliver on its purpose as defined in Articles 33 to 35 unless it is independent, and not just independent, seen to be independent by the people whom we serve as our audience, as the Kenyan people. We have to unpack that question by maybe borrowing from those who have done this and delivered editorial independence for their publics in a better way. And that notion invites me to consider the United Kingdom and look at what the United Kingdom has done with the BBC. The BBC is a public body, but some of the best journalistic and media standards are embodied by the BBC. The effect of that reality is that any journalist, any media operating in the UK must do better than the BBC or atrophy or die. We have our own KBC. We have our own KNA. By investing in these entities and getting them to set minimum standards for practice of journalism and for practice of media, we not only do justice to colleagues working in those spaces and to the citizens of Kenya, we also would then have a positive influence in the private media, because what it will then mean is that the private media must then pull up their socks and raise their standards or die. So, Waziri, I believe this is a matter that you're probably looking at, but you're also the single individual who has the biggest influence in how it moves forward. Second question around media independence comes to the whole essence of commercial success, because as we sit here today, the media mandate has been handed to commercial entities to deliver for the Kenyan people. Because of a host of factors, business is tough. Let's not lie to ourselves. Commercial entities exist to chase profits, and where there are not enough revenues, many of them will quickly default to cutting costs. But media and journalism is not just another commercial product. Where we have a reduction in the supply, the public suffers. So I want to invite us to also consider that question. How do we create an ecosystem that ensures that critical talent, professionals, and do-gooders in the journalism space have a sustainable way in which to keep doing that good? The third and second last thing I'd like to talk about connects to that commercial question, and it leads us to the whole area of media sustainability. How do we make sure that on an ongoing basis there's a way in which we can pay for journalism, there's a way in which truly independent media voices flourish, and not just flourish, but also gets to thrive, whether they be in the public sector or the private sector. Today, we have some policies which, on the face of them, seem like they're good policies, but in reality, I think they take away from the ability of the media to be sustainable as we stand here today. One of them is the whole manner in which the main pipeline that has been the mainstay of media has ended up being disrupted, and that's advertising. Anybody can wake up and set up their own media, which is a good thing, because the more of us that are able to share our views, I think the richer we grow our ideas and the stronger our country becomes. But if this is happening at the cost of the chance that we have a strong media going forward, then I think we need to ask ourselves hard questions and figure out how to get that working. What am I talking about? If you look at the media as a sector in terms of economic size, we find that if you were to measure that by advertising, it's been growing in leaps and bounds. But if we were to measure that in terms of turnover in the news media sector, it's falling at a worrying rate. And the biggest manifestation of that trend is what has now become an annual event, that every December in media houses we have not celebrations of Christmas, but cries of careers from people whose jobs have ended thanks to retrenchment. And that's happening because the advertising cake has been heavily fragmented. Because we have a lot more hands on that cake. But if you look at it keenly, a bigger chunk of that cake is getting exported through platforms, and therefore not being reinvested to develop and sustain our media, to develop and sustain our journalism. We have to ask ourselves hard questions on how that goes. The second bit of that, just an example, the so-called watershed policies. We know watershed policies are good policies to help protect family, to help protect children. But we also know that media attention has mostly migrated from the conventional space, that is from the newspapers, from the TV as we knew it, into the digital space. So how is it then that watershed policies only apply in the conventional space, but not the digital space? That today, if I was in the business of selling alcohol, I would not be allowed to advertise on NTV or KTN or Citizen TV, but I can easily advertise on a website that is built for kids. But the more critical thing then is that the biggest players in the digital space happens to be foreigners. Therefore, even as value is being built through such adverts, that value is lost 100% because it gets exported. The last point there is the whole question of the government advertising agency. We as editors, we as journalists, find it abhorrent that today we have a clearing house whose only job is to control which media gets what public advertising, because it then translates into a bulwark that can be easily abused, and it has been abused before, so that those who don't do stories that are seen as favorable by the government then end up getting less and less orders from the GAA. But we also know that there's a huge workforce of public communication officers sitting in every single government agency in this country who can't fully operate because part of their mandate has been taken out. I think, Waziri, you need to invite us for a conversation on how else we could do this to meet the interests of government, but also to make sure that it's done in a way that keeps the media secure. Finally, Bwana CS, my last point is on the question of securing media independence through self-regulation. The regulator of the media space, we are happy, is a child of our newsrooms, is an entity that was built by editors in this country and continues to be so, of course now with the participation of the state. As we sit here today, that entity has no board because the board's mandate recently collapsed. And I think I would like to invite you as stakeholders that you do what is needed to make sure that new board is put in place without much delay to make sure that these conversations and the role that the Media Council of Kenya must play is done and done right for the growth and development of this industry. We are also working together to ensure that the stakeholders grow and cannot grow without strong associations. So we have our own peer review mechanisms to make sure that the bodies that make the media stakeholders continue to grow as institutions. We'll be inviting you in many of those conversations, and we're happy to get the ideas on how we can serve the Kenyan public. I thank you once more, and I thank you for honoring the newsrooms and for honoring the news media with your first public event since your appointment. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's now my singular honor to invite Judy to come and invite Waziri to make his remarks and open this day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Churchill. Good morning, CS again. Good morning, colleagues. I'm sure you can tell that this was not in the program, and so that I do not belabor our issues here, I would just like to take this opportunity to invite my CS, Mr. Eliud Owalo, to come and address us. Karibu sana Waziri.
Kenya Media Sector Working Group Steering Committee members present, the President of the Kenya Editors Guild, the Secretary General of the Kenya Union of Journalists, Chairman Digital Broadcasters Association, senior editors present, and all stakeholders therein. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Allow me, first of all, to introduce the team that I came with from the ministry. First of all, Judy. Judy is one of you. Judy is our Secretary for Information at the ministry, Judy Munini. I have here also with me Dr. Barak Moluka. He's somebody you guys have been working with closely, and I'm one of you as well. Then Dr. Hannington Gaya, also just stand up. I believe most of you have also interacted with him, more so when he was chair of the Brand Kenya. Then I've got Engineer Obam. Engineer Obam is the head of our National Communications Secretariat. Let me mention from the onset that I feel very much at home because I've interacted with most of you in one way or the other over the past 3 decades. I see Mr. Rapuro there. Ucheng Rapuro was my classmate in A-level from 5 and 6. I see Linus here, yeah. I've seen Felix there. I've seen also Irungo Hatton. Yes, he's somebody also I've worked with closely those days when we were in the trenches, if I may use that phrase. Good. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the Editors Guild, first of all, it's my distinguished honor and privilege to join you during this very, very important occasion. As the world marks the International Day to End Impunity Against Journalists, this, in my view, is a very important day in celebration of freedom and reminding ourselves of the sanctity of life and human rights across the global community. It has been 10 years since the adoption of the UN Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the corresponding issue of impunity. We in Kenya, as you know, are signatories to that plan of action, and as government, we hold dear the safety and life of every journalist, as we do for each and every Kenyan. We are saddened each time a journalist is endangered, harmed, or loses life in the course of duty. We remain concerned that all over the world, physical abuse and even termination of life for journalists in the line of duty still persists 10 years after the adoption of the UN Plan of Action. This is to be condemned in the strongest terms possible by civilized society everywhere in the world. It is particularly tragic that in some of the recent instances across the global community, crimes against journalists have been perpetrated by those who should be the duty bearers in the protection of freedom of the media and, significantly, the right to life for everyone. These are critical intersections. There are critical intersections between the objectives of journalism and those of government. Both are interested in the welfare of the people. The only divergence is that we are pursuing this objective from two different dimensions, but the overall objective remains the welfare of the Kenyan people. Accordingly, the two, in my view, ought to work together rather than appear to be hostile and adversarial against each other. They ought to work in complementarity of purpose rather than in imaginary and often hostile competition. Both should be keen on achieving a democratic, free and fair society governed by the rule of law and, of course, in line with our 2010 constitutional dispensation. Granted, ladies and gentlemen, that depending on unfolding events from time to time, we expect that the media, and on one hand, and the government on the other, may hold divergent views. But we should not see that as a source of negative conflict, but in my view, it should be seen as an opportunity to enable the two stakeholder segments engage in constructive dialogue so that we develop a common denominator on how we should respond to the strategic issues emanating from their form and craft a logical and feasible way moving forward. Editors are important custodians of information, and as gatekeepers in the public information and communication space, editors decide which information will reach the public and that which will not. They even decide what angle or slant information takes, and sometimes very forcefully so, and even deliberately. Apart from information, editors also set agenda for the society. They decide which issues will be the greatest questions of the day for public discourse and which ones should be ignored. So what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, is that you play an integral role in shaping public opinion depending on unfolding events from time to time. And in that vein, in my view, we should work in partnership because we are all out to serve the well-being of the Kenyan people. Editors also shape opinion on important public issues. Indeed, you have the capacity to make the big issues small, and in the converse, also make the small issue big. We as a country, and indeed government, the Kenya Kwanza government, respect media freedom. We hold media freedom dear to our hearts, and we will do everything possible as government to ensure that media freedom is upheld in conformity to the relevant articles of the Constitution and in other pieces of law, if not subsequent relevant legislations. We do believe in media, we do not believe in media censorship or gagging of the media. We believe that if the media is responsible, then the media should be able to regulate itself in line with the laws of the land and, of course, ethical dictates of your very profession. My ministry, and of course by extension the entire Kenya Kwanza government, will continue to defend the freedom of the media alongside other civil liberties. Even as we continue to respect these freedoms, ladies and gentlemen, we recognize that social conflict and divergence of opinion, which I had alluded to earlier, is part of a healthy society. In any society, conflicts will always arise depending on unfolding events from time to time. But from a ministry perspective, my plea is that as and when we get into those type of situations, let's talk to each other as opposed to talking at each other. I will actually cultivate and institutionalize an open door policy so that within short notice, I remain ready and available for those consultations. Conflict, however, must be managed and even transformed for the overall good of the society. Democratic society, such as ours, have institutional forums and instruments of resolving conflict and the pressures that generate it. In the case of the media, related pressures and conflicts, we have the Media Council of Kenya, which is a statutory body, and to which both the government and journalists are members. The council, in my view, has got an integral role to play in the management or resolution of those conflicts as intended by the law, and just to ensure that we don't have any lacuna in that space. I will be very, very soon, subsequent to the relevant consultations, constitute the board of the Media Council of Kenya. While difference of opinion and approach is normal in civilized society, social conflict and even political conflict should never degenerate to the extent of descending into criminal activity. The ideal in every conflict situation is early monitoring, evaluation and reporting, and swift intervention for purposes of conflict management and transformation. I believe that this can be done through the Media Council of Kenya, and of course, while integrating the integral input of all the relevant stakeholder segments depending on unfolding events from time to time, ladies and gentlemen. In my view, crimes against journalists come in different guises and of course perpetrated by different players. The assumption, based on historical experience, tends to be that government is the perpetrator. But this may not necessarily be the case. Indeed, most of the time, rogue elements within government have given entire departments, such as law enforcement agents, a bad name while acting in their individual capacities. The government, in my view, must remain vigilant at all times and will indeed do so to protect journalists and citizens against rogue elements within our midst. Within the context of self-regulation, ladies and gentlemen, the media must also, in equal measure, guard against internal rogue elements whose acts in their individual capacities may tarnish the hard-earned image and reputation of the fourth estate. This may be media owners, journalists at the top echelons who oppress their juniors, or those who engage in gender-based defiant behavior against their colleagues. Commercial interests too come into play to facilitate oppression of journalists and to muzzle free expression. These two must constitute part of what journalists protest every second day of November. In my view, ladies and gentlemen, journalists must also learn to work together. It is awkward that on a day as important as this, the Kenyan journalism fraternity is pulling in different directions, marking the occasion in different groups that appear to be mutually hostile to each other. I advise that you should get your act together, if not, put your house in order and speak with one voice. It has been said that a house divided against itself will not stand. You have got a better bargaining chip when you are united as opposed to when you are divided. And we would wish to see you united because it is for the well-being and good of the entire Kenyan society, government inclusive. Let us continue, ladies and gentlemen, talking to one another in the interest of a just, free, and fair Kenyan society as envisioned in our 2010 constitutional dispensation. Let us also recognize that freedom comes with responsibility. Editors have got the duty to protect other citizens against abuse through sensational, prurient, and salacious falsehoods and other unethical coverage that victimizes and violates them. We owe each other the responsibility of care, ladies and gentlemen. As I move towards the tail end, I just want to quickly respond to some of the issues that were brought to the fore by the chairman of the Editors Guild in the course of his submission at the beginning. The issue of setting up the new council, of the Media Council of Kenya board that I've alluded to already, we will consult appropriately and ensure that it is in place in the short run, as fast as possible, as fast as feasible. Rejuvenation of KBC and even the Kenya News Agency, ladies and gentlemen, these are issues which I hold very dear to my heart. I believe you equally do so because most of you are actually products of the same KBC. Yeah, let us work together. Some of these interventions will require working with stakeholders from all perspectives, and where we can pull together to rejuvenate or revitalize or re-engineer the operations of the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation and Kenya News Agency, please let us pull the efforts together. And indeed, I was at both KBC and KNA yesterday, and as a ministry, we have actually committed to those two institutions that we will do everything in the shortest time possible by way of a turnaround strategy. Review of watershed advertising. Now, the issue of government, the disbursement of advertisement revenue or allocation of the same through the government GAA. This is something that I have to look at closely. I'll have a working session with GAA. I've got issues not just from this forum, but also other forums, a bit of complaints here and there. We will look at that issue and come up with the most feasible way moving forward for the benefit of all stakeholders involved. And if anything, I will also, in one of the subsequent forums that I intend to have with the media fraternity, just get your views so that the same is integrated in the re-engineering of that issue altogether. The killing of Ashad Sharif. This is being handled by relevant arms of government, specifically the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I know we have a duty as the ministry responsible for communication of government position in on issues that touch on government and even issues of interest to the public. I will consult my counterparts in those ministries, and as and when this information is available for public consumption, it is still at very delicate stages, we will definitely reach out to you so that you help us in dissemination of that information, not just to members of the First Estate, but to the public at large, if not the international community for that matter. Attack on journalists, I think I've handled this within the same realm of respect for freedom of the media. We don't foresee this happening within the term of our Kenya Kwanza government. Actually, we want to look at you people more as partners, our partners in governance, as opposed to competitors from whatever perspective you can think of. We intend to work with you people very closely, and we don't foresee any issues that may bring to the fore conflicts that may be insurmountable. And of course, in the same vein, we will continue upholding, if not adhering or conforming to the independence of the media from a policy perspective, regulatory perspective, or otherwise, depending on unfolding events from time to time. As I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I want also to invite in realizing or facilitating the realization of our vision of an empowered and digitized Kenyan society. You have a role to play in that, and we believe that you will augment our efforts so that we leverage on ICT to transform our country for purposes of sustainable economic development. Very lastly, as I conclude, I did mention during my vetting that I would wish that my performance as CS of this ministry is evaluated on the basis of certain key but very fundamental performance indicators. One of them was the facilitation of paperless government through digitization of the entire government system. The other one was facilitation of access to free and affordable internet. The other one was the leveraging on ICT to facilitate creation of jobs, digital jobs. I want to add a fourth one, ladies and gentlemen, this morning, that I would also wish that at the tail end of my tenure in this ministry, my performance will be evaluated on the basis of satisfaction, not just of the integral stakeholder segments, but if there's anything called media satisfaction index, then I would wish that my performance be evaluated on the basis of that, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CS. Ladies and gentlemen, before the CS sits down, can we stand up and appreciate him? So let's appreciate the CS. Thank you. Bwana CS, it is my humble request that you officially open this meeting.
Sorry for that anomaly. With those many remarks, may I now declare this session officially open and wish you a good day indeed.
Thank you. You can get seated. Ladies and gentlemen, looking at our program, we are falling a little bit behind schedule. we have had this session officially opened, and we need a little bit of time to reflect on the guidelines, on the statements, on the policy directions that have been given by the CS. I will therefore request that we break for a group photo with the CS, and when we come back after about 10 minutes, we will have the Office of DPP making their presentation, after which we will have a short session and then the panel discussions. Thank you. We will have our group photo just right here. So we would request that our media people help us organize for the group photo. Ladies and gentlemen, karibuni mbele. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have the group photo. We begin with the Kenya Media Sector Working Group. Kindly come so that we can be joined by the CS. Kenya Media Sector Working Group. Thank you. The group behind the Kenya Media Sector Working Group can get seated. Let's have Kenya Editors Guild join the CS. Bwana CS, we request that you keep seated. Kenya Editors Guild, members and officials. Thank you. I think the next group that I'll call, Kenya Union of Journalists, KUJ members, of course, except the ones taking photos. So KUJ members. Thank you. The next group that I will call is a group of panelists. Mr. Ilungu, Mr. Kaikai, Professor Levi, Felix, our panelists. Let us join Churchill. SG, you can join them. Mr. Wapua, kindly join. Mr. Chen. Mr. Janak Olo. And Jacinta, Madam Jacinta Nyamusi, kindly join the list of panelists. Madam Jacinta. Part in the group photos. I want to end it there. Unless there's any group that feels they really need to be in the photo. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Ms. Bonasias. So, ladies and gentlemen, we can have a quick tea break. Pick your cup of tea, cup of coffee, health break, then come right back in so that we continue. and gentlemen, I wish to request that we get back in and take our seats. Kindly to our participants who are still out, are you free to come in with your tea? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this session. We have had a productive first session, and of course some of the things that have been highlighted are issues of media policy, issues of media independence, issues of the need to empower state-owned media, issues of sustainability of the media, issues of responsible reporting, the need for duty bearers to protect journalists, and the need for collaboration between media and government. We've also been assured of media freedom and the need for self-regulation by the CS. I think that is a very important starting point. And our next session, we will have a representative from the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution who will be giving us her remarks. But before I invite her, probably just for her benefit, is that every year, Kenya reports to UNESCO on the status of judicial inquiry conducted in the killing of journalists in Kenya. For the past several years, we have been giving a report on the status of that judicial inquiry. As of this year, there are still 3 journalists whose judicial inquiry is not yet concluded. And probably those are some of the things that going forward we might need to look into. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome our next speaker. Our speaker is Madam Jacinta Nyamusi. Madam Nyamusi is the Deputy Director of Public Prosecution, and she comes in to represent Mr. Nordin Haji, the Director of Public Prosecution. Let us put our hands together to welcome Madam Jacinta.
Thank you very much and good morning. On behalf of the Director of Public Prosecution, I want to confirm that he would have wanted, he actually intended to be here today, but there was a very early morning assignment which he had to dash and deal with. And I can confirm that previously in forums like this where he's been invited, he personally comes and speaks to members of the Fourth Estate, and we usually have that dialogue. So please, his apologies. Asante sana. Thank you, been introduced. Asante. So I will actually read his remarks. That is Mr. Nordin Haji's remarks. I know that all protocol observed. Good morning. The ODPP is honored to join you here today as we commemorate the 10th anniversary of the International Day to end impunity against journalists. From the onset, I would like to thank the Kenya Editors Guild and the Kenya Media Sector Working Group for hosting today's event. As members of the Fourth Estate, you play a critical role in ensuring democratic governance with the society, where transparency and accountability for public and state authorities can be demanded. Indeed, as the media, you are representatives of the public, being a mouthpiece for the aggressions suffered, concerns raised, and needs of the people. Through this role, you therefore champion adherence to the rule of law, respect of human rights, and the freedom of expression. In the digital age, the role that you play is of even more importance, as your ability to share information at a faster rate to a larger audience has increased exponentially due to social media and enhanced connectivity. Ladies and gentlemen, with great power comes with great responsibility. As such, you are expected to be professional in the discharge of your duties and adhere to your code of ethics. I urge you to refrain from sensational media reporting and misreporting, which often undermine the rule of law and public confidence in our institutions. For instance, the two media houses that were recently cited for contempt of court for misinformation of a key witness, which jeopardized the case. I therefore urge you to focus on reporting the truth and facts to safeguard the rule of law. I'm cognizant of the fact that as journalists, you may be subjected to instances of aggression and violence, as witnessed in the case of the Pakistani journalist, Ashrad Sharif, whose case is under active investigations. As an office, we can assure you that we will prosecute those found culpable of committing this heinous offense. Now, more than ever, the media is under digital siege, making your work complex. Personal and violent attacks on journalists are becoming more commonplace online, with women being particularly vulnerable to sexual and gender-based violence. This has a negative effect on journalists who are forced to retreat in silence. As the ODPP, we thus assure you of your commitment to ensuring the protection of the media space and your security in Kenya at all times, in accordance with not only the Constitution of Kenya, but also the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convent of Civil and Political Rights, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. In ensuring this, our mandate will be guided by the Constitution and the ODPP Act. In addition, we have developed policies such as the Decision to Charge Guidelines 2019, in recognition of the fact that the decision to charge is an enormous responsibility that needs to be streamlined and exercised with control, transparency, and independence and accountability, and of course, high levels of professionalism. By adhering to these guidelines, we ensure that the prosecution of all crimes, including against journalists, are conducted fairly and professionally. These guidelines will thus ensure that the perpetrators of crimes against all Kenyans, including journalists, are brought to account and will also play a role in preventing frivolous cases that might be brought against you. A strict adherence to the law will be observed. As I conclude, I would like to remind you that the media defines the public's image of the actors in the criminal justice sector, including the ODPP, by providing oversight through crime and court reporting. I urge you to work together with us in your reporting so that we can build public confidence in government institutions. I would like to thank the Kenya Editors Guild and the Kenya Media Sector Working Group once again for holding this event. Thank you and God bless you. Mr. Nurdin Haji, DPP Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Jacinta, and thank you for honoring our invitation to come and represent the office of the DPP. Ladies and gentlemen, we have had her assurance of fair and professional prosecution of crimes against journalists and the important role that media plays in oversight of the work of judiciary and every other institution. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, our program reads that we're going to have a plenary session or responses to the presentations. I know that we are a little bit behind schedule, so we're going to take the next 5 minutes. If there is any question or response to the presentations, then we can have that done, after which we will have a session, a panel discussion, we go straight to that? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I've been guided that we go straight to that. I don't know if Madam Rose Lucalia is in the house. Thank you. So I will be stopping there and handing over to the next moderator. My name is Angela Silima. I work with the Kenya National Commission for UNESCO. I wish to invite Madam Rose Lucalia, who will chair the next session. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much. The name is Rose Lucalo, and very, very happy to be here among friends of long-standing. I look around, I just see friends. So I will just say all protocols observed and go in as we celebrate this International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. I just first want to add my own voice to the call for justice for the Pakistani journalist. I think it really, really hit us. And really just to have this moment to unite with his family and to feel, to bring back the presence of what we are actually calling for today. It's very sad that we have such an example here in Kenya, so close to the celebration of this day, but I think we all know there are many, many cases. When SG, Eric Odor is not here, but he always tells us about the intimidation, the harassment, the beatings, the being thrown out of rooms, and nothing happens. Nothing happens to give justice and to allow journalists to do their job. So I would have also liked to put it on the record. Much as we keep talking about something's being done, we never hear what was done. And I think it's time to call also for an end to the silence. We have our award-winning author, Yvonne Award says, the language of silence is taking hold in Kenya. We need to break that language. We don't need it here. Media plays a vital, vital role. With a very light touch, I'd like to say, for me, there was a moment I considered the media was running the country, and I take you back to when we first heard COVID was in town. All the leaders disappeared. Everybody was in their house. And it took the media to say, Allah, where's everybody? Where are the parliamentarians? Where are the legislators, Critical role. And I'm so proud of the sector. Even when I criticize the sector, I'm so proud of it. I think that the media does a really critical job in terms of holding us together, keeping us informed, and keeping us moving forward. Which is why this moment is very important. I think much as we do our job, it's very important to reflect. And as a member of KEG, I'm proud that we called this meeting because I think it's critical that we take stock of what we do, critical that we remind ourselves that we are always called to serve the public, and to reflect on, did we actually do our job around the elections? In that regard, I'm going to call Rosalia Omongo, our CEO for the Editors Guild, to come and present around the election. And then we'll ask other friends, to come and tell us if they agree. So, Rosalia.
media sector, like all other sectors, agreed that we were going to work together ahead of the elections. Always in other years, media is fragmented, every media house trying to do its work alone. But we agreed that as a sector, we would come together and do joint collaborations so that we are able to occupy our space during the electoral process, and also try to do things together so that we are able to move the industry forward. So the project was the election project. It was led by KEG, and it was donor funded by the Open Society Foundation and also by it was premised on a lot of things for the media. Most of it, we wanted that the project should focus on things to do with accuracy and fact-based reporting, to enable journalists to be impartial and accountable and responsible reporting. And we had objectives of strengthening the capacity of journalists, bloggers, and editors to report fairly and accurately, factual and timely electoral data to citizens, and then to strengthen participation in democracy through monitoring and countering disinformation. Right? So, in order to do this project, there were critical steps with the people in this very room, the members of the Kenya Media Sector Working Group. So we led participatory activities of the working group to, first of all, build consensus and work together as a group. We were told here by the CS that it's best when media works as a unit and not as fragmented. So we came together as the Media Sector Working Group, and the critical steps also involved establishing strategic partnerships with civil society organizations and the duty bearers, chiefly the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, as well as the Office of the Political Parties, ORPP, the Registrar of Political Parties. Which is countrywide, and also some industry collaborations, including setting up of a fact-checking desk, and also some of the activities that were to be included there included the Media Tallying Center at the Bomas. So this began with a journey of the Kenya Media Sector Working Group, revamping this group that was working as just an amorphous body. So this group got together and agreed in Manzoni in 2021 that we were going to move together and work together as a team so that we are able to boost the capacity of the industry. All right? And then, so after Manzoni, that marked the beginning of that journey of the election coverage. So in 2021, in June, we reached out to the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission to begin a partnership. How then do we work together with the IBC to enable them to be giving timely information and also to enable journalists to be able to learn on the electoral cycle? Then in August, specifically on August 9, which marked a countdown towards the August 9, 2022 elections, we had a meeting, an industry meeting, then to cement this partnership, where a team of editors was also nominated to help to chart that course. All right, those are just some of the activities of the industry at Manzoni, bringing together the 21 associations that make up the Kenya Media Sector Working Group. All right. Then the strategic partnerships with the various offices began with meetings to build consensus and to look for how then we can move together. So that meeting had the various duty bearers, including IBC, ORPP, and even the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. All right. Then, with the IEBC, we got into an MOU that would enable release of information, that would enable better sharing of information with the IEBC. And this was again signed by the members of the Kenya Media Sector Working Group. All right. So the other strategic partnerships involved joining with the civil society groups. There was a civil society group drive to bring on board an election situation room, which ideally was supposed to enable sharing on information among the civil society groups on what was happening in the field. So there was a control room where members of the public were able to post real-time information, and then the members of the civil society groups were charged with verification through their teams on the ground, verification that whatever was being posted was actually what was happening on the ground. So that was the election situation room. And the issues that were being monitored there included ballot materials, whether the stations were opening at the right time, whether media was given access to the stations, and also monitoring for fake news and information. So that was activities with the civil society groups. Then within the Media Sector Working Group, we organized training of reporters across the country. Remember, being a cycle every 5 years, and media being a very an industry that has high turnover, so people will have left in 5 years, and therefore very new people will have come on board in 5 years. So that meant that there were very many new journalists reporting on elections for the first time, and this countrywide reporting focused on newsroom management, newsroom safety, constructive journalism, and fact-checking. And then we partnered with the IEBC as part of that MOU. So IEBC was coming on board to speak about the legal framework, the electoral cycle, the polling stations, and the processes in there, including the materials, as well as election technology. Our provincial administration units, so we went to the counties. We went to the former provincial administration regions, that is Coast, Northeastern, Central, Rift Valley, and we got journalists from those areas to participate in those topics that were being taught, including safety and security, fact-checking, and newsroom management. All right. Yeah, so those were some of the teams. Those are some of the teams of editors and journalists being trained. Okay, we are, in all the trainings we tried to get on board equal representation. So we tried as much as possible to get on board. There's always less women journalists being trained, so we have to look for ways to bridge that gap. There was also a focus on community radio stations, vernacular stations, and we did 6 trainings, and these were marked out based on reports from the NCIC. They were marked as hotspots. Okay, so these included Uasin Gishu, Kisumu, Mombasa, Kericho, and Nairobi. So trainings took place, and then we also held mentorship sessions for the vernacular station journalists in those regions. Right. Then we also held a session with court reporters, with the Court Reporters Association of Kenya, because getting into an election period means that after the elections there will have to be complaints and petitions. So that training focused on election petitions in collaboration with the Judiciary Training Academy and the Office of the Chief Justice, the Supreme Court, judges of the Supreme Court of Kenya were training journalists in that session. So we also had the Media Center was created to enable journalists report effectively from location. So this was located at the Bomas of Kenya. Okay, and so we were able to get on board. It had a small capacity, like 50. It had 50 computers, and other journalists were able to work from there and report to their media houses. All right. Then there was the joint media tallying. All right. The joint media tallying, which was the biggest issue of concern in this sector. So the media came together and agreed that we were going to do a joint tallying of results. All right, and planning went into it. There was actually much planning with both the chief editors. There was also planning with the IT experts from the various media houses. But this was dropped at the last minute, and this was mainly because of different capacities of the various media houses. So the plan was that we would do monitoring, yeah? So monitoring of the elections or the tallying from the 290 constituencies, but that did not happen basically because different media are differently resourced. So media houses thought that they would do it alone. So that was abandoned at the last minute. So nonetheless, at KEG, we proceeded with a tallying. It was a tallying, but of samples. So how we did it was that we picked 40 constituencies, 20 constituencies, and 20 each of the strongholds of the two major presidential contenders. So 20 Azimio strongholds and 20 Kenya Kwanza strongholds. And from there we trained and dispatched university students who were supposed to go and monitor and collect the data. So they were collecting, they were taking the picture of the Form 34A and then posting that to a portal. So we invested in a portal that was able to collect, served as a depository for the forms that were being sent in from those constituencies, and that is what was tallied. So we would say it was a sample, really. It could not have been, it was a sample of what was going on the ground. All right. So the constituencies, the data collection centers, so they're named down there. So those were the regions that were perceived as strongholds, which is where we sent the university students to go and collect the data. All right. So they were also supposed to monitor other things while they were there, whether there was access to the polling stations. They were also supposed to monitor how different interest groups were being treated in the polling stations where they were, whether the people with disability were being given preference, whether the returning officers or the presiding officers were allowing them a chance to do their work. So that was the sort of reports that they returned. those were just sample reports from the students who were sending in the reports from the ground. Most of the reports were positive. They were allowed in. They got accreditation. Therefore, most of them were able to get, save for just very few. So we would say that there was really no challenge there. And this is largely because of the MOU that we had, which granted for access to information. And then on media coverage, we embarked on a joint report with the Africa Center for Media Excellence. And the report was analyzing coverage of the 2022 elections and from the newspapers and television. So that analysis was done by the Africa Center for Media Excellence, Kampala-based, and largely the research showed that media was generally quite fair in their coverage, that all the candidates got almost equal, coverage. So that was the highlight of the report, that media coverage of the campaigns and elections was generally quite equitable for the candidates, right? Then the other issues that we looked into were the threats and attacks against journalists. And so while we are marking the International Day to end impunity against crimes against journalists, for Kenya, the sort of threats and attacks cannot be compared with what happens in some countries. But during that season, July to August, 6 journalists were intimidated or harassed. So this is either by politicians or by police officers while in their line of duty. So some of these cases were reported, and we always encourage journalists to report, because then that becomes a basis for action. Yes, the reports are then taken to the DPP's office. So journalists are always encouraged to report. Okay, so that was done. Treatment of preferential groups. So in conclusion, all right. So we responded to the discourse on elections, and so we've fulfilled a mandate where we'll be able to then share with policymakers and practitioners this report, and we hope that they'll be able to pay attention to it. The report also has some recommendations. So this report it's also set the stage for joint media tallying for media houses. We can use the example of what KEG did to highlight maybe the challenges that face other media houses that would like to embark on such a major. It's a really, really resource intensive. It's a resource intensive undertaking, but with early preparations, that can happen. Then we have recommendations on what, based on our experience in covering the 2022 elections, we have recommendations that we would like to throw out to the media fraternity and to the CSOs and to government, so that we see then how to move forward and make 2027 better. So the key thing that we realized was that we began a little late. Fine, we began the talks and the mobilization in 2021, but on the resource capacity, we began a little late, even looking into ways of acquiring a system for money for capturing the electoral data. So what we are saying is that the 2022 work on 2027 elections must begin early, in all fronts. From the presidential media joint tallying of election results can also happen by the same media coming together. Then the results that we did for the 43 constituency So if we believe that if that begins early, then that can be scaled up to all the constituencies across Kenya. All right. We have also recommended that we need to have an introspection session at the annual convention, a session on electrotechnology. Kenya Editors Guild has an annual convention in December. And one of the things we would like to focus on is on electrotechnology. Whether can there be capacity for editors or journalists to be helped to report on, to specialize on such specialized reporting. So I believe that, and that's what our recommendation is, that more goodwill will be necessary from the media owners. This exercise began like very well, but it was abandoned last minute. Was there goodwill from the media owners? That's a question that we can answer in the next session. There was a lot of misinformation and disinformation in transmission, in results being transmitted. So that is a subject that we cannot wish away as editors. Yes, so that's the biggest question. Yeah, so that was one, the signing of the MOU on access to votes. All right, then yeah. So that's the question that I would like to pose to the next session. There have been different sections of people have been alluding to the fact that media was the weakest link in all this electoral process. Was media the weakest link? And I hope that we can answer that in this session. I want to thank you.
Thank you, Rosalia. Rosalia, sorry, I always get people's names right. Yes, civil society has worked with media for many years. And at times we're partners, at times we're protagonists, but I think the relationship is always solid. And we are calling on civil society partners next just to give their feedback on and their perspective. Their feedback and their perspective on how we performed, because it's all very well to say that coverage was fair, and even that I think needs to be nuanced. What do we mean by fair? We need to get into that subject more deeply. So to help us really just take a deeper look at ourselves, we're going to invite first Irungu Houghton. You heard his mention named earlier. I don't think he needs very much introduction in this room, but he's a long serving member of civil society, has served in very many roles in that space. I will not go into it, but he's here today as the Executive Director, and he will be followed by Felix Award, the Executive Director of the Electoral Law and Governance field. So Elgia, sorry. To fafanua a bit also how we did from their perspective. And then now we'll call on brothers and sisters, and brothers, and no sisters, responding from the fraternity to respond. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you very much, Rose, and good morning, everybody. So a couple of comments, just in terms of reaction. I think the first very emphatic response to Rosalie, your comment was really, you're not the weakest link. I don't think the media was the weakest link in this election. I think we would have to look at other areas for that. I think the absence of voter registration, the manipulation the vote bribing and the vote buying that took the confusion within the IABC and the tensions between commissioners, these were the weakest links. I think the lack of internal party political party democracy, these were the weakest links. I don't think I would turn to the media for weakest links. Having said that, let's look at the comments. I'm not sure whether I actually qualify as an independent assessment of the media. I've been a columnist for 6 years. I counted the other day 300 articles, and goodness knows how many media hits you've facilitated for Amnesty and others, but I'll try my best to be critical. So the first thing I think we have to recognize, of course, and this is something that you're very familiar with, is that the 400 or so media houses, whether it be radio stations, TV stations, or print outlets, are vastly outnumbered by the 12 million people on social media. So the first thing to recognize is that this is a very complex ecosystem to navigate as journalists, because you are dealing with many of them are anonymous, many of them are not checked by anybody, but essentially are very influential. And as we learned recently, up to 300 misleading profiles or anonymous profiles have the capacity to galvanize public opinion and even distract your journalists into stories that are just not evidence-based. So I think that's one of the first challenges from this election. For those of us outside of the media community, what did we appreciate? I mean, I think we appreciated your training of journalists. I believe from some of the reports I've seen, up to 3,500 journalists and editors were trained on hate speech. They were trained on misinformation and disinformation, and they were also trained on context or conflict-responsive or conflict-sensitive journalism. And I think that investment was really important in terms of the focus. I think the KUJ, IABC, KUG guidelines but I think the actual quality of the guidelines was important. The third area really relates to, please don't take this microphone, otherwise I'm really in trouble, right? The third area relates to the issue of self-censorship, intimidation, and assault on journalists. And it's very timely for the International Day of Ending Impunity or Violence Against Journalists. According to the Media Council of Kenya, up to 90 incidents this year of intimidation and assault of journalists, which was a 28% increase on the previous year. So the question that I would ask is actually, how do we expand the space for safe reporting in the next year going forward? And I just wished, but I know, Judy, you're here, the CS was here, because I think this is really the challenge for the state. It's not necessarily a challenge for media houses. It is the duty, first and foremost, is with our government. The fourth area relates to balanced reporting, and there was a lot of bashing that took place of your media houses. There was a lot of passive aggressiveness. There was a lot of aggression from the politicians, and some of them now occupy positions of tremendous power and responsibility. So it is important that we remind them that journalists need to be able to report without fear and without any sense of intimidation at all. Of course, they have to retain a fidelity to the truth and also to the laws of our land. But nevertheless, fear is not one of the options for managing or regulating a media sector. What we've heard independently of yourselves is that, in many ways, the Kenya Kwanza political party actually got more private coverage in, I think it was radio and television, with Azimio getting more coverage in print coverage. This is what the international observer missions have reported, and the source for this particular one is the European Union Observer Mission. That was the report that has now just come out. So in a sense, once the dust has settled, we actually can exonerate the media from the idea that somehow you became the communications department of one of the alliances or the other. Yeah? But having said that, there are lessons, I think. I mean, there are lessons in terms of how we report, how we slant stories, but I think on the general charge, of was the media completely biased in this election, the answer to that has to be based on evidence that no, that is not the case. Let me turn to a couple of ideas that perhaps would be useful to generate. And let me just start by echoing Rose's comment that all of us must be demanding the arrests of the killers of Ashraf Sharif. This day must not go past without some strong statement from this community that an attack on a journalist is an attack on us all. And I think, let me focus on kind of 5 areas that potentially could form a memorandum to the Kenya Kwanza government. The first is that, the first one is probably not going to be popular with the media owners, but given that I assume that many of you are journalists and editors, this might cross over. So I apologize to those of you who are always thinking about the bottom line. But I think the Election Campaigning Act, particularly the regulations that relate to limits on paid advertising, is an idea that I think its time has come. That we have to find ways of ensuring that the media does not get hijacked by the richest, the most wealthiest parts of our political class at the expense of those people who really represent the 75% of the population under 35 that come forward to serve us. So I think regulations need to be brought into place as quickly as possible before we get into the heat of the next elections. The second area of focus really is that we do need to see a definition, a legal definition, a better legal definition of hate speech. And one of the ways I think we can do this is to go back to the international community who have developed standards, and I think UNESCO is here. There are standards that we could bring into our laws that would help us to deal with the kind of toxicity that we saw on the social media and the media spaces without criminalizing free expression. The third area relates to the access to information. And I think this is one area where any government that says that it's about freedom, it's about expression, it's about self-actualization, any government that commits to that must bring in or rather initiate regulations with regards to the Access to Information Act. Jubilee failed to do this. I don't see why Kenya Kwanza could not operationalize, develop and operationalize those regulations. I think the next area relates to the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act. And I apologize if I'm stretching a little bit from my task, but I think what I'm trying to do, I think, is to give the Kenya Editors Guild a lease of a future, lease of life into the future. But I think, you know, sections 22 and 23 still remain on our statute books. And if there is one area where impunity and violence against journalists takes place, not necessarily physical violence, but in terms of criminalization, those are the 2 sections that are offensive, they are unconstitutional, and they need to be withdrawn. Many of you, I'm sure, are very concerned about the use of criminal defamation charges against your reporting. And in some cases, the reporting is, you know, it may be unfactual, it may be misinformation, but it is not necessarily a criminal act. It simply needs to be corrected in the time-old tradition that editors have done, which is to simply publish a retraction and to clarify that the information was inaccurate and essentially step back from it. But I think what we're seeing is huge and very heavy penalties against journalists and particularly, I guess, media houses in terms of defamation. So these are some of the areas. The last one I wanted to raise was really something that seems a little bit far from the media, but is equally as important, which is data protection. We now, for the two years now, have a Data Protection Act, but as we've all seen, trending today is Mary Lincoln. You know, I had to stop myself for wanting to see why she was trending after I discovered what she was trending, because the next thing that I would have I probably would have seen is those nude viral videos that are essentially going around the internet. And I think it's so important that journalists and media houses protect the right to privacy, protect people's decency in moments like this. It doesn't matter if it is catchy, exciting, and it generates thousands of clicks. it is so important that the media retains a set of, set of principles and values around this area. So I'm going to stop there because I think I've probably talked for quite a while. The last message really to all of you, I think to AMWIC, to the Kenya Editors Guild, to the Kenya Union of Journalists, to the Media Council of Kenya, is to encourage you to continue to speak, to report, to write, courage fluently, as a friend of mine would say. And just to remind you that Amnesty International will always have your back. Thank you very much.
I've been encouraged by the moderator that I just come here. So I've obeyed that instructions. I want to be very, very, very brief. First of all, my name is Felix Odhiambo. I'm the Executive Director of the Electoral Law and Governance Institute, and I'm pleased to be here. Thank you, the Kenya Editors Guild, for the invitation. Let me begin by agreeing with Irungu in response to the question that was posed by Rosalia. Yeah, that usually happens to me as soon as I stand. I hope it's working. Let me agree with Irungu in response to the question that was posed by Rosalia, whether the media was the weakest link within the context of 2022 general elections. And the answer to that question, and without any fear of contradiction, is a big no. For the reasons stated by Irungu, the responsibility of holding credible elections and the weakest link in our electoral process since 1992, if you want to go that far, but most recently since the promulgation of the new constitution, remains still our own election management, as well as with political parties. I think Irungu has enumerated the specific examples, and I don't want to add anything in that regard. I will look at the media, the role of the media within a very narrow prism. During the opening remarks, as well as presentation by Rosalia, sort of looked at or reflected on the very comprehensive work that the media did within the entire electoral process. Our interest and our engagement and partnership with the media was with respect to the role of the media in the results transmission framework, and I think that partly, or that is where the question or the assessment of the media as the weakest link probably came from. But let me reiterate, as I start, what I said, for those of you who heard me before the elections, that the role of given our electoral context, given the polarization, given the level of competition in the Kenyan electoral process, the role of the media in the results management process probably was, and I still maintain, the most consequential intervention in our election, and if done correctly in future elections, will contribute meaningfully and impactfully in securing the credibility of our elections, but also consolidating our electoral democracy. As I said in various meetings, the attempt or the participation of the media in the results management framework or system happened in 2002 during the 2002 general elections. Again, we did it in 2005 referendum. But somehow after 2007, this role became fuzzy, and that role has been diminished. But there was remarkable attempt within the context of 2022 general elections to try and revive that role. Part of the perception that the media may potentially have been the weakest link in this election also arises as out of a misunderstanding. And I think it is very necessary in responding to that to walk you down the countdown. I agree with Rosalia's assessment. The timeline for comprehensively looking at or putting in a framework for the media to participate in the results tallying processes within 2022 general elections started very late. Consider the following, that it was the consultative meeting that was held between the media, the Kenya Media Sector Working Group, Kenya Editors Guild, Kenya Union of Journalists, the Electoral Law and Governance Institute, which is ourselves, and the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission that was held in Ukunda was done on the 23rd, or between the 23rd and the 26th of June 2022. During that meeting, or that consultative workshop, we had the privilege of bringing in the Electoral Commission of Ghana and Joy News of Ghana to share comparative perspectives on how they do it and how they've been able to make it a success in Ghana. But it happened literally less than 2 months to the general elections. Now, the signing of the MOU, first of all, I think it should be appreciated that there was a meaningful role in the results management chain. Nowhere in the Elections Act or nowhere in the Elections General Regulations of 2012 was the role of the media in results management chain outlined. So to circumvent that legal lacuna, the KEG, ourselves, and IEBC drafted the Memorandum of Understanding between the IEBC and the media to offer guidelines and framework upon which would govern or guide the media in tallying or in having a role in the results management. Now, the signing of that MOU happened on the 19th July 2022. Elections was the 2022 general election was held in August 9th. You can imagine that time frame. Barely 3 weeks, that is when that MOU was signed at Kempinski Hotel in Nairobi here on the 19th of July. So there was absolutely no time upon which this MOU could be effectively implemented. Now, what worked? I think let us also look at what worked, given the time constraints that are pointed out. Number one is that despite all odds, the legal framework and the partnership with the IBC, as evidence in that MOU or signing of that MOU, was achieved. And immediately after that, between 19th July and August the 9th, the media or different media stations were able to establish results transmission secretariat, as we saw during the August 9th elections. And as part of that, the media were also able, the various media organizations were able to mobilize staff, data analysts, and other staff who were deployed and indeed worked at the tallying center or the various tallying center secretariat. What didn't work? Number one was just it was the insufficient time to internalize and effectively implement the MOU. Time simply was not there. For those of you who are in Ukunda, for those of you who had the Joy News or the Joy Media from Ghana, they took us through the processes that they have embarked on, including a study tour to the CNN headquarters in Atlanta, and the level of preparations and the time that it takes them to be able to have a meaningful role in the results management system in Ghana. Number two, in terms of what didn't work, was that the collaborative and joint framework between the various media organizations did also not work. Rosalia alluded to the fact that there were plans to have a joint and collaborative tallying center. This did not work, and we saw during the elections, different media organizations were relaying their own results. Now, as part of Rosalia's recommendations, there was, or the KEG will take it upon itself and try to have a collaborative framework in the next election. But I want to persuade you that given the competitive nature and the adversarial nature upon which the media operates in this country, I doubt whether that will succeed. I think a recommendation should be that KEG or an umbrella organization of the media promulgate a policy framework and establish their own tallying centers, but guided by this MOU. In Ghana, every media organization does it on its own and as they please. And in America, we just perfected this. Repeatedly and routinely, you see CNN calling results, MSNBC, Associated Press, and things like that. I doubt whether there is any country in Africa where a collaborative or joint framework has worked. Now, finally, in terms of what didn't work, either arising as a result of the late start of this process, the media did not quite understand where the source of their data was supposed to be, and instead simply relied on the IEBC portal. I want to persuade you that moving forward, and as we remember the presentation from Joy News from Ghana, that is not where you should get your results, or that is not where you should get your the data from. Remember, the role of the media and results management system in a context such as ours is to provide an authoritative counter-check on the results released by the Electoral Commission, not to get the same results from the IEBC portal and transmit. I think probably because of the logistical and heavy financial burden, you may want to consider as we move into 2027 that if you can't go to the 44,000 polling stations, at the very least go to the 290 constituencies and base your results on the declarations contained in the statutory form 34B, if you can't get 34A at the polling station. I think but moving forward, I agree with Rosalia, we really need to start very early. I still maintain and believe that done correctly, the role of the media and results management will meaningfully improve our electoral process and secure the credibility of the electoral results or electoral outcome. And on our part, at the Electoral Law and Governance Institute, we still hope to partner with the KEG, and we will walk with you this journey. Please don't abandon it as we move to 2027. I think my scorecard would be 60% with respect to your role in the results transmission framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. You have to forgive us. Did I butcher your name on top of your organization's name? I think I called you Felix Award. You are Award. Fine. You said Odhiambo, so I was worried now that I had called the wrong name and the wrong organization. Yeah, so we've had two very thorough responses to the work that we did. Challenges put to us, a critical one at the end. Are we actually engaging with the right stage of the process as we try to craft responses to it? Is the weight electoral tallying process, should we expand it, and what are the other areas that we should be looking at? Very, very much, I think all of us agree we needed to start earlier. As Rosalia said, I think we've always said that. But what do our titans of the media say in response? Do they have a response? Do they agree? And to rejoin, the rejoinder will be given by Linus Kaikai, well known, and also Ochieng Rapuro, also. Sorry? No, they're not speaking to me. Rapuro will speak after him.
Good morning, colleagues. I think Irungu and Felix have made my work this morning very easy. I'm here to agree with them. And maybe I should sit down after that. particularly elated by their collective position on the question posed by Rosalia on whether media was the weakest link. Because it has become something of a tradition in assessing sectoral performances during elections. The media since 2007 has not been looking really good. We meet after elections and beat ourselves to a pulp and say how we wish it would have been different, how we wished we could have done better. So it comes to me as a very, very huge relief when the answer to the question of whether the media was the weakest link is a big no. That's a very good vote of confidence in the performance of the media. There was still another question that was raised by Irungu, and that is the question of bias. And I really appreciate that in good detail, including quoting reports. I think the European Union was one of the organizations that did an assessment. I just want to urge that we share those reports as well so that they can inform the editors on what the dynamics were. Because in my view, the biggest challenge this year, in this year's election, was that active accusation of bias and perceptions of bias. So again, it comes to me as a relief, and I think this goes to my colleagues as well across the fraternity, when Irungu reports that there was no evidence. And I think one of the reports did indicate how the coverage was distributed. And we feel very encouraged that indeed bias, if indeed that it's established that bias was not a serious problem. I want to also say one of our takeouts from Irungu's presentation should be on the legal landmines out there. And he pointed 3 acts: the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act. He also did speak about hate speech provisions, which actually remain, and I agree with you, Irungu, they remain very vague on what really constitutes hate speech. Because if we are not careful, provisions on hate speech or interpretation of hate speech provisions can actually amount to restriction of free speech, especially if it's overused, if it is deployed wrongly, and if it is defined wrongly, which is where the problem is. We also should take note of the fact that up to now, we don't have a single conviction arising from hate speech charges, which in itself doesn't say that there's no hate speech. It just says we have a problem in how we have defined it, and even the courts are finding that quite problematic, and especially in relation to Article 33 of the Constitution, which guarantees freedom of expression. So we really appreciate that. Those 3, the Data Protection Act as well, which is the space we need to watch. And I do agree, and maybe just take this point further, because we all now as media practitioners, media houses, do have an online element. And what I notice, and this is sort of an admission that ought to come from all of us, we seem to have different rules for the traditional platform, whether we're talking of the broadcast platform or the newspaper. Then you have an online platform that plays by different rules. And I think this is what I was hearing when Irungu was talking about Mary Lincoln, the story that is trending about an artist whose nude photos were leaked to the online platforms. Maybe we should also be questioning ourselves as an industry that our editorial policies, do they cover the full stretch of the landscape we operate, or are our online platforms playing by different rules? Coming to Felix's presentation, again, I want to agree with you. It was wisdom coming too late, towards the end of July, when we started getting together as an industry to discuss the possibilities of playing a more prominent role in the results management and results transmission. And I think, Felix, what we can tell you is the media underrated what it takes to actually do that. It takes years, months, if not years of planning for a proper election transmission, tallying, and management system to be put in place. We got together, we went to Kunda, and the spirit was really good, but the body was weak. Because when we came to Nairobi and looked at the numbers, what it actually takes to be present in all the 44,000 polling stations, I want to reveal here that the president of the guild did convene an emergency session of the High Command somewhere in a location in Nairobi. But the president, the food was really good. And we had what ended up being a very futile discussion on how we should approach the election results tally. But wisdom is here now, just as is freedom. And Felix, I think we borrow from the examples you've shared, including that of Ghana. And here is my take. First, in agreeing with you that it works if we put our resources together. And I want to say, we've done this before. For the third election now, the presidential debates is becoming an entrenched media-driven, joint media-driven endeavor, and it's working very, very well. It worked quite well. Whether it's about resource mobilization, content management, editorial oversight, and all that, we have proved that it is possible for media houses to work together in some of these national projects. I'm under no illusion, absolutely under no illusion, that this is the future. So we have 5 years to the next election, or just under 5 years to the next election. Felix, I think that is sufficient time. It's slightly longer than July 19th to August 9th, which was a period of less than 20 days. Because there is absolutely no shortcut. I think we can come to certain conclusions as well. One of them is there is no shortcut. Felix, 290 doesn't work. We all tried the 290. 290 doesn't work in the sense that you are still essentially working with the IEBC data because of the Form 34B that comes to the constituency level. And remember, the idea behind having an independent media tally is so that you have a credible alternative to what IEBC is running. And the day we hit that, we will be really doing a great service to the country and also improving on the trust. Because right now the environment is that of mistrust. People don't trust what they see. And when you tell them it's data from IEBC, you know, they speak of cooking and things like that. But you can imagine if media houses got together and went to all the 44,000 polling stations, which is possible. It's not impossible. We just need resources to actually make that possible. And we transmit the results. We will be playing our role. And I know it's not in the act, it's not anywhere in the law. But I think there's something we call, is this huge law we operate by. It's not in any statute. It's called public interest. That is what we serve. We can go out in public interest and say, we have our people in the polling stations, and they are able to send this transmission, the results to the National Tallying Center. I think I've covered all, and I think here you referred to our adversarial relations. As industry, we are competitors, except when we are talking together about the GAA. We are united, yeah. And all I want to say is that we've tried a number of models, and one of them that is really admired is that of the presidential debates. If you had gotten a chance to be at the Bomas, just to see what it takes to put that together, 100, 200 media personnel from different places, lots of equipment. It is doable, and I'm absolutely convinced the time to do it is in the next election. Finally, thank you very much to Irungu and Felix for sharing with us your perspectives. And I want to encourage you to keep those perspectives coming in, because your eyes looking in from outside, and you'll be able to really enrich our processes, whether electoral or journalistic, with your perspectives. We thank you very much.
I think I invited Rapuro while he was out of the room. Please just come and make your response.
I'm trying to whisper to her. I wasn't on the program. Be that as it may, I could make a few comments building on what my colleague has presented here very ably. When it comes to assessing the performance of media, in an exercise such as the one we've just come out of, the one big thing that is often forgotten is that the media space is a contested space. It is contested internally, and it operates in a contested environment. And when the contest is as intense as our political contests, the strain within the media fraternity becomes so intense that those inside there actually are in more heat than what they call being in the kitchen. And these contests really determine the outcomes of how the media applies itself to these situations. So, it is not, we will not do justice to this if we do not my view, aside from looking at the outcomes of what we do as a media fraternity, there is a very big need to look at the internal fitness of the media houses themselves. And internal fitness here is so broad as to look at important aspects such as the professionalism of the people in the room, the people running the operations. Yeah. Number two is what Irungu and Felix have both talked about. What is the legal framework? Yeah. Starting from within, do media houses actually have good and solid internal policies to manage these kinds of contests? Yeah. Right from the traditional platforms into the new and digital platforms that both Irungu and Linus have talked about. If you don't have that internal fitness, definitely something will give. Number three, which is always something very remote and quietly talked about, is also the governance system in the media organizations themselves. The governance system goes all the way into the ownerships of the media entities and how then the media entities relate. You know, are there strong internal bulwark that shields journalism on its own from such influences that are in the house, they're not coming from outside. So having said that, I think I will then go into the how of what we did. And my own sense is the judgment that we have had, and which Rosalia used to pose the question, is mainly based on what happened really at the tail end of this process. Yeah. As we all must acknowledge, we are in the very situation where the old adage goes, we cannot have the end always to be the price that we are looking for. Processes are important. How we get to the end is important. The end cannot justify the means. Yeah. So from that process perspective, my own view is that the media actually did its part in chaperoning this process of election, you know, starting right from the beginning, you know, when the relevant legislation is being enacted, amended, refined, all the way to the election management body, how it is exercising its mandate, and all the way we kept reminding the electorate that the electoral management body missed almost virtually every deadline in the book. Every deadline in law was missed, be it voter registration, voter education, the audit of the voter register, the making of that audit public, you know, the printing of the ballot papers, the engagement of the consultants or the suppliers of the election management platform, everything. And that was covered effectively. And the other side of the political parties was also covered. I would like, having been reminded to finish up. As I said, I wasn't on the list, so let me summarize. I think my own sense is that I'm adding my voice to Irungu's presentation around legislation. You know, we still need to really focus on legislation around elections, including those governing specifically for the integrity of coverage. The one governing access to information is still, to me, a big one. And then data protection. On the hate speech one, I also agree that we don't have, we have something that looks like legislation, but I think the jurisprudence around this is weak and, to me, non-existent. Finally, on the tallying, we just have to put our minds around, if we want to address this thing properly, around the kind of investment that is needed for the media to play its rightful role. As Felix has rightfully identified, the media's role is not to churn out the data that is coming from the election management body, but to act as an independent body that brings out data that counter-checks whatever is coming from the election management body. And this needs a lot of investment. I can tell you, Felix, we at the Standard actually put a lot of investment in being at the 290 constituencies. It doesn't work because, one, the timeline, you will basically be trailing the IBC. Because from 34A, remember, comes right from the polling station to the National Tallying Center. You are still waiting for these guys to finish and then move to the constituency tallying center. By that time, you are basically trailing. And for the media, timeliness is very critical. So I will leave it there and just hope that we will organize ourselves better. I was part of the team that enjoyed the meal that Kai talked about in an attempt to organize ourselves for joint tallying. It didn't happen. I'm sure it will happen next time. Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry to ambush you like that, but you were put on my program. I'm very clear. I want to request Olo Jana from the Kenya Correspondents Association to come and give the final rejoinder. In view of time, we're trying to be out of here by noon, and I apologize for putting pressure on you at this stage. So the last presentations, as we wind up, please just try and limit it to about 5 minutes max.
Is it afternoon or morning? It's not quite noon yet. Let me check. Yeah, so I can say good morning. I think there have been discussions around this. For me, I think every election period we normally have some sort of reflection. I remember the difficult reflections we had at the Hilton. And, before we went to the Hilton, we had a huge discussion with Joe Dindo on the plane from Kisumu. On the difficulties even within the newsroom. For example, media can be present and see how many people are killed. But then certain issues come up and you see, we are waiting for the Kenya National Commission of Human Rights to release its figures for IPOA or that kind of thing. So there are many dynamics.
I quite agree with what Rapuru is saying. There are internal dynamics around some of these. I think it was important that you people had a discussion around this, and Churchill and many of you, we had these discussions. It is important that we engage the Electoral Commission, but I think I quite want to agree that there were certain internal things within IBC that were already flickering, even when we were in Diani. Remember, during the plenary, during one of those, around tea break, I raised the issue of even the failure of technology, even for the journalists, to get accreditation. The system collapsed. 3 days, nothing could happen. And, some of the IBC officials were very cagey when I raised that. Of course, later they assured me. But one of them indeed indicated to me that their system had been under attack several times that week. So these were issues. If you looked at the gelling, there's a story I'd always persuaded my colleagues to try to do, but we held it back. I think we also wanted to save the IBC from implosion. 100 days into the recruitment of the 4 commissioners that eventually, dissented, we attempted to get a few of our colleagues to say, can we check if they have gelled? They didn't. They were outsiders. And the period within which the other commissioners left and these ones came in had left a situation where certain operations had gone on and other people coming in didn't know what was happening. Now, I think there are important conversations we need to have within the media sector, within the IBC and all the other frameworks. But more critically, I want to thank our colleagues here who are thinking about this dialogue. And I want to persuade the Kenya Media Sector Working Group that we need to have more of these forums just to check what is happening. I am operating from the premise that I deal with journalists who are on the ground. Politics is very polarizing. The ethical questions around the management of results and so on, even the credibility of journalists at that very time, whether or not they can give you the results you desire, is something that we've got to think about, because we must persuade the journalists that they are doing an important public duty, and that at that time, they probably need to remove the coat of their allegiance to the local MCA or the other guy. We had a county where journalists were sometimes handed into a room and asked to sit on the floor by one of the gubernatorial candidates. Then another one locks them in a room. Or journalists themselves saying, so-and-so cannot come to this press conference, managing those systems on the ground. So if we are talking about the next elections, then we need to think internally about a number of processes. But also, even as we want to rely on the journalists on the ground, and if you are saying, okay, now, which media are we saying should be relaying the results? The national media. Okay? Are we thinking about the local media and their own relaying of results? I have experiences from past elections where some of the smaller media organizations would relay results of winners before the winners have been declared. You see, what is the oversight? What are the peer review mechanisms that we are developing? Because sometimes we speak in Nairobi without speaking to the emerging rogue ownership of media and the managers in those stations. Yet, if we work together, currently we have enough media stations and some of the journalists, even if some of them are not paid, that probably can help us say, because the polling stations are not 50 kilometers apart. No, it is possible for one journalist to be deployed to manage 2 or 3 polling stations. It is possible within certain environments. So that we reduce from 44,000, we reduce it to something manageable. Or we say that we look at certain critical sampling of those ones and say, if we manage this, then probably our counting would add value to the processes. So I want to end by saying that right now, one of the conversations we need to check, we can't have pretenses about this country uniting after the electoral period. There are conversations from different sides, especially of the major political divide, that will affect the next election significantly, including communities that support different sides? Are we putting our hands on the pulse of those conversations? Because we may be planning for another election when there will be total withdrawal and voter apathy that probably we may not have anticipated over that period. So let us have the conversations going. Let us internally look at the weaknesses that we have. And also we want to invite Felix and all the other partners to help us move this process forward and to convince some of the people who support us. Let them not come in the last, at the last minute. Perhaps we need to go to Ghana as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Janak. Okay, yeah, I mean, we've concluded with the main part of the program. And as moderator, mine is not to interject too much, but I did want to just latch on to something that Rakuro has said, and that's the internal fitness. I don't see many people talking about the digital sphere, and I think there was a huge failing. There was a huge miss. When we talk, the Cabinet Secretary said it's his intention to create a paperless society. Are Kenyans ready for this? Are they aware? Do we have the literacy levels, digital literacy levels? We're already on Huduma number, we're on e-government, we're on Adisasa, we're on COVID, the Ministry of Health, COVID, and blood donor. So we're already quite far into digitizing, and the reality is there's no preparation. We've seen many, many reports of political manipulation of that digital sphere. We've seen reports of people who were paid from 2-3 years ago. So the process did not start here, and I think it's very important that that goes. So I heard Rosalia talking about electoral technology. It goes beyond just the electoral technology. Having said that, we can take 1, 2 pressing rejoinders if there are any. I'll ask you to keep it really brief. Yes. Elimu TV, is it? Digital broadcasters.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Jane Modiga. I'm director at Elimu TV and also the secretary for Digital Broadcasters Association. I'm actually representing our chairman. Derek Arendje was not able to come in. Just a few points for comment after the discussion. And I think I would say that as we have said, that there is also the challenges that we face. And I would also want to say that for us to continue with the gains, we need not to stop. We need to look at opportunities that are emerging, that are giving us a chance to perfect the process of planning. Very soon, we're going to have elections going on at Kandara, Garissa, and the other places that have already, are now vacant. And actually, we should be able to take that opportunity to do the planning, to position ourselves, and see, how best we can be able to perfect ourselves. Yes, we need to continuously with IEBC to position ourselves properly, and also continue rolling funding, maybe from the media houses, the donor agency, and also the government, because this process is actually maybe the only, the only other alternative for to compare their data. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. The last comment from journalist from Human Rights. Sorry, the name just went. Please introduce yourself. Mustafa.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Mustafa Dubu is my name. I'm the journalism team lead from Journalists for Human Rights. I would just like to really emphasize the point regarding collaboration. Mr. Felix Ojamo was about the potential to one benefit to that face-to-face diversity report, and one of them is the issue of resources. As the science development, the media houses can't afford huge reporting, and that can have what probably that should have like
He says Sierra Leone offers a second case study along with Ghana. Jane was talking about the opportunity to really practice, get into practice right now with the by-elections that are taking place. To wrap up, I'm going to invite KEG Council Member Martin Masai, and I think his will be the concluding remark.
Thank you, my sister, Rose Localo. The distance of those days is still there. I found Localo as a science editor in KT, and I worked there many years ago. It's really difficult to make a conclusion of very important remarks made by very focused minds. But let me just do it very, very briefly. I want to identify, as a matter of going forward, that today's conversation has brought to us a grand opportunity to refocus on what we do. Picking from the remarks coming from the CS, I make no mistake, and I have no doubt that he spoke from the bottom of his heart. And I think for the industry, it's a great thing for us to take advantage. He has an open door approach, and that there is a guarantee by the Kenya Kwanza administration to the freedoms that we espouse as practitioners. But as this happens, let me also say that as journalists, we need to match those words to the actions that will come from this government. Let's not take that and probably just be happy. We need to keep on looking at the actions, because then they will be underlining those pronouncements. There has also been a challenge here that we put our house in order as media people. Let us not pretend that there are two events celebrating this day. Our regulator is having an event, we are having an event here. So, as a new board comes into place, let's look for an opportunity. We have our own conversations that we need to bridge this gap. Those efforts need to be accelerated so that we speak with one voice. I think it's important for the industry going forward. I need also to make a comment on the elections report presented here. Bottom line, we need early preparations. If we begin now, these explanations you're giving now will not be due 2 months after August 2027. Sometimes of clarity. You hear a pronouncement that there will be no one appointed, no one in the opposition appointed into government. A very good thing because the government anticipates a robust opposition. But even before that dries up, you find that members of the opposition have been lobbied into government. At the same, within a month. So these are some of the things to keep on looking at. More importantly, our election service. And I was a member of that task, the task gave us an opportunity to learn about issues, elections, including the law, the framework. Let's not forget that this time round, one of the things that need to be done is the elimination of boundaries. It's going to bring with it a lot of challenges, a lot of conversations. Remember those protected constituencies? Is it time for them to die? And will these boundaries just be done in such a way that they favor political formation, or is it going to be for the good of the people? So it's something that we need to check on and underline this by a continual engagement. The MOUs that we signed with the IABC will require that we sign more MOUs with other organizations so that we don't work in silence. Let me conclude by underlining the review of regulations my brother Urungu highlighted, computer use, hate speech provisions, Data Protection Act, and it has also been indicated here that the digital sphere requires better preparation by media houses, which say, so this means as media people, beyond what we do in newsroom, we have to keep engaging. And so, in conclusion, so that we also don't forget about why we are here today, the issue of impunity, ending impunity. Let me say that impunity really appears like it's a universal feature. Let's remember the story of a man is murdered in an embassy, out there, in his own embassy, the embassy of his own country. And as we speak now, there is nothing. Or have we seen anything? And there will not be anything. Look at the case of Sharif here, and we must, as journalists, keep on asking questions. How much did the Pakistani embassy here know about the presence of Sharif here? Remember, Sharif was on the run from home. So, this coincidence that our own officer just opens fire and shoots Sharif alone. So these are things that we have to keep asking. And let me tell you that governments remain the same, much as they appear to be different, much as transitions take place. So this issue of impunity in journalism, remember we said that there is no story that's big enough for you to give up your life for. But let me also say this is my last statement. Remember, the bird in Chinua Achebe. He says that when men learn to shoot without missing, so birds learn to fly without perching. The question is strategy. So let's strategize as media people as we move forward. Thank you.
We come to the end of the program, unless there's any administrative message from the Secretariat.
We'd like to welcome you to lunch. We have lunch on the fifth floor. Our meals are 10% off. So once we're done, we'll
Thank you very much, and thank you, Martin, for reminding us why you were here. And all of it is related, even as we discuss the election, and I think election we will talk about it, to discuss it in the next item of meeting. Thank you all for being here. Feel free to join us at lunch.